Monday, the 20th of November, 2023. This week, they've paved paradise and put up a parking lot and a few Musa buildings. We'll talk to activist Tauriq Jenkins about the development in observatory of Amazon HQ. Around the world, or specifically in Gaza, at least 5,500 children killed in Palestine. Biden under pressure as NBC polls show him for the first time losing in a head-to-head versus Trump, and his personal approval ratings plummet as a consequence of the impunity that the US allows in Israel. Back home, UK bank Standard Chartered admits to fixing bid offer spreads, the spot exchange rate and the exchange rate, among other things. And they agreed to pay an administrative penalty of 42.7 million rand. They made billions out of this fixing. The penalty, 42.7 million rand, not pounds, rand. Entertainment news, Cassie and P. Diddy settle abuse and sexual assault claims out of court. Bad boy for life was going to spend time with R. Kelly as his Sally otherwise. Finally, the Democratic Alliance are going to win the 2024 elections, according to DA sources who conducted DA polls among DA members. And they found that they are within a hair's breadth of beating the ANC in the elections. Of course, this is the DA's polling, so take it with a lot of salt. Thank you for joining us. My name is Roscoe Palm. And Nantle, it's good to be with you again, brother. Sorry for jacking the mic all the way there.
I'm good, man. I'm good. Yourself?
I'm good, man. Yeah, it's nice to rain. It's nice to have some rain for a change. And
it's nice, yeah.
Yeah, but summer's coming. Listen here, man. This Cassie and P Diddy thing. It's like I always wonder where Cassie went to. Where she?
So I don't know if you know. A couple of months, actually, say a month ago, can't be more than 2. He actually gave all his ex-artists their masters back, and an influencer on TikTok said a PR person in the States said something is coming. He's cleaning up his image for a reason. Because he wouldn't give it away just for spek and boonsies.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And there, lo and behold, and I thought personally it was the Tupac thing that
I also thought that.
But it was probably the Cassie thing.
Or maybe it's the Cassie. Okay, I don't want to speculate on air about, yeah. But that was an interesting wrinkle. So, okay, this DA polling is bizarre. It's insane. The DA have said, according to their own internal polling, the DA, according to them, is now just 7 points behind the ANC, with the DA securing 32% and the ANC 39% support from all registered voters. The ANC is falling below 40%, confirming external polls. Now, those external polls, they come from the Brenters Foundation, which is, Greg Mills and Ray Hartley, who are not objective in any way. And they also come from the Social Research Foundation, which sounds like something that's, objective. But the Social Research Foundation is, it's a rebranded Institute for Race Relations, which is one of the most sort of like, it's a liberal, or it's a neoliberal think tank. For neoliberal means far right. Franz Grenier and these guys, they massage the figures. Now the DA internal polling says that they are within 7% of usurping the DA. But let's put this into some kind of context for what history says. In 2004, the DA got 12.3% of the vote. 2009, 16.66%. In 2014, they got 22%. In 2019, they dropped to 20%. That was, of course, they used that performance to get rid of Musi Maimane. In 2024, they say they're going to go from 20% up to 32%. So that's a massive thumb-suck figure. We are fully into propaganda mode now with the DA. And with the Palestine issue, they are seeing that people are not necessarily comfortable with the DA as being the standard bearer for how we should operate, how society should operate, and the moral compass that the DA should be in charge of. So I think this is, there's never been a time in history when you've gone from, when a political party has gone from 20% to 32% or increased by 12%. So this thing is just like really, it's propaganda at the most, the crudest propaganda that you can possibly imagine. Let me just, and the way that these things end up in the media unchallenged, it's being reported in IOL, it's being reported in News 24 that the DA say that they're going to, but these things aren't put into context. So I'm putting it into context for you now. If the DA get 32% in the 2024 election, not the Moonshot Pact, the Democratic Alliance, if they get 32%, it means that John Steenhuisen is political Jesus Christ, performing miracles, turning political water into political wine, and we should all then worship St. John Stewart of the Democratic Alliance. So, Tauriq, I want to welcome you and to the show. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. I want to include you in this game that we're going to play, because while I was posting about this interview that we're going to have, I posted on the Observatory Facebook page, because we're going to talk about matters in Observatory. And I found the most bizarre post by this guy. I think we've redacted his name, but it's perfect. It's a perfect opportunity to play a new game called "Is This Racist?" So welcome to the game, Tauriq Jenkins. So I'm going to read this post for this guy, and at any stage, if you or Nantal, you come across a statement that's racist, you can just say stop, and you can tell me why this is racist. Right.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's really good to be here.
Cool. Let's play. Is this racist? Okay. It appears that the process is finally underway to create a 10,000-seater stadium for professional soccer matches at Hartleyvale. This will greatly inconvenience the residents of Observatory, and they have voiced their opposition at public meetings over the years. With 10,000 plus many more thousands of soccer supporters from the Cape Flats converge on Observatory, it will add significantly to traffic congestion, crime, and noise. I think 10,000 people converging from the Cape Flats on Observatory, it's a little bit, yes?
That's racist.
A little bit racist. Observatory residents are not racists. They are not racist, Tauriq. This is what the guy says. Observatory residents are not racist, nor are they anti-soccer, but they are anti-hooliganism.
That's racist.
That's racist. Admittedly, 50 years ago, there were professional soccer matches at Hartleyvale which attracted huge crowds. But in those days, soccer spectators, in brackets of all races, were well behaved. Not so nowadays. Back in the day, there was a lot of white people playing soccer in the National Soccer League. It's a bit racist, right? The white people knew how to behave themselves when they were playing soccer, but not these days. It's mainly black and colored people. Nowadays, when their team loses, they run amok outside the stadium and damage municipal and residential property, and businesses are looted. When was the last time a business was looted after a soccer match? I'm not sure. It would have been all over the newspapers and the news. Also, there are always intoxicated idiots, already intoxicated when they arrive at the venue, blowing on their vuvuzelas late at night and on Sunday afternoons before and after games.
Yeah, that's racist.
That's racist. Why is it racist?
Well, I think to assume that all soccer fans are intoxicated idiots and blowing on their vuvuzelas late at night, I think creates a particular kind of impression that's specific to a certain demographic and a certain class. So I think it does insinuate in a particular kind of way a non-preference to a sport that predominantly invites a black audience.
And of course the vuvuzelas, certain people blow vuvuzelas, certain other people, they don't know how to blow. It just comes up, sounds like a a very loose fart when certain people blow the vuvu's, according to...
Although I must just contextualize historically, you are correct in the sense that, during apartheid, soccer teams were separated and so forth. But at Hartleyville, there is also a history of soccer matches that were being played, and it contributed to large masses of community members who were not resident at the time in Observatory, who would come from the Cape Flats and other places, Grassy Park in particular, to go and support their then favorite soccer team. So in that sense, it's maybe it's a little confusing in terms of the messaging on that particular point from this author.
But it goes on. It goes on. Let's see, maybe blowing the noise will be heard throughout Observatory and will drive residents crazy, as will spectators screaming and shouting in the streets long after the game is over. Does this person know what happens in Ob's Lower Main Road every day of the week? That's basically life in Ob's Lower Main Road. Observatory is a residential area and upholds certain standards. We don't want hooliganism in our area. The record shows that soccer spectators dictate and soccer fans rule. Which record?
Okay, that's odd. Because if you go to cricket matches, for example, I've been to cricket matches and have confronted a phenomenon called the Barmy Army, that are extremely enthusiastic cricket supporters from the UK and around, who travel with their team with great sense of commitment and dedication. But depending on the time of the evening that you might meet some of these fans, I think the definition of hooliganism or inappropriate behavior on behalf of one sporting team could certainly be shared across basically all sports. Let's take the Rugby World Cup final. I don't think there's a single place or metropole that didn't have a range of incidents as a result of that. And this was because people were genuinely happy, but there were also incidences of break-ins, of windows and things like that being being smashed and things. So it's not as if the passion that fuels destructive spectatorship comes from soccer. So I would say that is probably non-factual.
But Tauriq, you derailing my bit with logic here. You had logic and a reason arguments. But that is racist. The guy goes on and on. No municipal regulations and law enforcement will stop them. We saw that at Newlands. This is the part I think is like the mask slips. The national government is always saying, invest in our poor. Therefore, big soccer matches should be played in the poor areas of the Cape Flats to help uplift those areas. People of the Cape Flats, that's racist. People, that's racist. People of the Cape Flats always complain about the long distances they travel to work. So give them big soccer matches in their area. So it's like, look, you don't need to complain about like spatial apartheid. We're putting like Cape Town Spurs against Kaizer Chiefs there in your area. What are you complaining about? What are you complaining about spatial apartheid for when like world-class soccer can be had in your poor areas? Give them something to be proud of. Society needs to be transformed and government has a duty to assist in this regard. Cape Town City Football Club could use Athlone or Philippia stadiums, which are perfectly good and underused. It's not necessary to build a new stadium in Observatory. So, that's also racist because it maintains that there's certain sporting codes and certain things, certain activities that should only be in certain areas, but not here. Not here in Observatory. Not here where we have ratepayers associations and things like that.
I think, in all honesty, it's very unfortunate in terms of how this particular author has presented a very important question to the observatory community that has been a sore thumb for close to 20 years. I think the articulation of these certain arguments, do not really hold much water. To other more critical aspects, that the community has been concerned about. I think the one point there, which perhaps has got some misgiving, is this idea that one must take soccer and have it in Athlone. Well, Observatory has an Olympic world-class hockey pitch in Hartley Vale. There's cricket in Malta Park, and soccer has been part of Hartley Vale for an incredible long period of time, including a very unique history about Observatory of having the first multiracial cricket teams in South Africa being played there. Primrose Cricket Club, a history of really good development from clubs like FC Kaapstad that have an impeccable record of development of black players across the peninsula, and have found a home in Observatory. Then you also look at the Tin Hats, where one of the bigger buildings has encroached on the larger Malta Park area. Historically, was a place for one of the first soccer grounds, which eventually also turned into a venue for some of the first multiracial clubs in Cape Town. So in terms of sport, diversity and the history of Observatory in that sense is absolutely, unfortunately, not reflected in this particular comment. The key thing that the residents of the key things that residents in Observatory have been concerned about would include environmental factors, traffic. When you have a 10,000-seater area, and now, as you know, it's opposite a proposed Amazon development of 4.5 billion rand development, and given the kind of existing road infrastructure, the accommodation of that kind of heavy footprint is something that Observatory is very concerned about, and in terms of how that's going to be dealt with has never been made clear. Also, the plans around Malta Park have always sort of shifted and turned. It was a 10,000-seater, a 5,000-seater, but I think one of the major concerns is the realization that what lies beneath this stadium includes a shopping complex, and it includes, a mall and these kinds of facilities. In terms of the environmental footprint, this is on a floodplain, and so one has to also observe, existing environmental guidelines that do allow community to voice legitimate concerns around inappropriate build. Observatory, as I understand, is not against development; it's against inappropriate development, and in fact, is a community that has fought against the encroachment of inappropriate developments. This is one of the only civics that, for example, overcame a hijack attempt in 2017. When developers, architects, and so forth irregularly attempted to take over the civic, and the civic managed to survive that. In fact, the community came at a very famous special general meeting and filled that community hall to say that there's a unique fabric about Observatory. It's often been described as a grey zone. It's been described as a multi-layered place of leftist academics, hippies, and so on. And although it was subjected to a degree to the Group Areas Act, not nearly as ferociously as other surrounding areas and so on and so forth. And this is not to say at all that Observatory does not also have a conservative component, that there aren't people there who are racist. It is just very diverse in terms of its expression. But when it came to the idea of massive encroachment of inappropriate buildings in the area without consent, this is a community that has been on a very difficult and challenging journey against inappropriate developers and large, multi-million, 100 million, and rand buildings where irrespective of how the community would want to meaningfully engage with the authorities. At the end of the day, this is a community that has learnt that the only form of restorative justice is actually to take these entities to court. And I think one of the reasons why Observatory has also been an area of contestation against massive developments, and similar to the River Club, is because it didn't just come out of thin air. It comes out of a history of robust activism against inappropriate development.
Let's talk about for me, the Observatory, the River Club site was I didn't know anything about the history, the heritage, that site being the scene of the crime of the first land theft in South Africa, effectively. For me, the River Club was where I went to go and watch the Springbok New Girls and Squeal and Sugar Drive and all those great 90s local rock bands play it. That was the place that was where you'd go for that. So when I heard that there was going to be a development at the River Club, many years later, it was, for me, it didn't have any particular resonance. It was just about another developer coming in. When did you hear about this development, and how did you interface with that contestation of the land?
Excellent question. Interestingly enough, it was round about the time where the Civic was hijacked, that the Civic was exercising its right in terms of, objecting in early already to this idea of 150,000 square meters of concrete bulk on a floodplain, or to at the end of 3.5 billion rand development, which has moved up since. And I think the community understood that with a development of the scale, it was going to have to engage in those kinds of processes. There's also a place where, because of the engagement with the Khoikhoi and San communities, and in terms of the engagement of this very unique particular kind of history, developed a very unique intersectional struggle between people who had different reasons, for not wanting this development to happen, and in some cases, different kinds of politic. And I think, when one looks at it, this whole notion, the Tutu notion of what a rainbow nation would be, the response of communities in this way that then, open up and enter into that kind of intersectional relationship with indigenous communities, I think, for a time was and has been, I think, exceptional. So we started hearing about, this around about that time, 2016, 2017. The site had been sold in 2015 from Praza to the private developer to the tune of 12 million rand. And we're talking about, 14.7 hectares.
That's a steal.
Yeah, and what we understand, and it's, public record, that, within a month or so, a bond was granted by Investec to the tune of 100 million. Now, I think what's important here, Roscoe, is that when you see that large portion of land like that, which is zoned public open space, being purchased for a song, and then you got a bond coming through that's almost 10 times the amount that it was purchased for, you begin to understand that there is something that's going to happen, mainly the rezoning of that land. How people become billionaires overnight, and how the development industry can catalytically increase the value of a piece of land is through rezoning. So overnight, once the Municipal Planning Tribunal makes a decision from public open space to multi-purpose, suddenly that piece of land exponentially increases in its value.
That's just the value of the land by itself. That's not the value of the project that's going to be built on the land. So the 12 million rand bought from as at that time it was zoned as public open space. 12 million rand. They changed the zoning of the land to multi-purpose. Immediately, that land is worth 100. How much? 100 and.
Not yet. This is interesting. Within a month of the purchase, a bank gives a bond to something that was bought for 12 million to the tune of 100.
Effectively, they've created value out of nothing.
Well, I think the question would be, what was the assurance that upon purchasing this particular land that it was worth that?
It's not speculation. People were told that, listen, this is going to happen. X, Y, and Z is going to happen. This 100 million rand valuation would be a snip compared to what would still come. I mean, I'm speculating about what would have happened.
Well, how we've experienced the way the city works with developers is that often they are confronted with or are part of a co-design package of designs, a package of plans. That package of plans then goes through some, kind of internal and interdepartmental consultation. And then by the time it goes out to public consultation, the package or plan almost becomes an ironclad sort of entity. Of course, there have been various iterations of this development. The developer will argue that he's had hundreds of iterations of this and has cost the company a considerable amount of money by having to engage the communities and take into consideration what their concerns are. But our argument has been it's never reduced the footprint. If anything, it's increased the footprint. And that's because when you have developments of this scale, of 150,000 square meters of concrete bulk, and they're multi-billion rand developments, the commercial and business logic hinges on a certain percentage of profit. And in order to reach those numbers, there's an assumption that you have to have a particular kind of maximized bulk or a particular kind of bulk in order to get to where these numbers are. Otherwise, then the development doesn't actually make any business sense. But as communities, we're not necessarily concerned about what is business sense. We're concerned about an entity coming with a completely inappropriate package of plans that's going to redirect an ancient sacred river, that's going to impose this kind of bulk on top of a floodplain, which goes against climate change mitigation policy, it goes against environmental policies, and it goes against cultural and heritage sort of definitions, and in our view has always been in violation of them. You'd know that the city's own environmental department objected to this development, and of course the statutory heritage body, Heritage Western Cape, completely outright rejected the heritage impact assessment of what the developer was offering.
So sorry, after you heard about that this transaction was happening and the rezoning was happening, what did you do about it? What did your group or interested parties do to object about it, to get it to the attention of these bodies like the heritage oversight bodies and City of Cape Town and so on?
Well, interestingly, Heritage Western Cape had already taken umbrage to this development to the point
of their own volition.
To the point where they were concerned that the genus loci, the sense of space, and being aware of the fact that this was already an intensely significant historical heritage terrain for the San and Khoi, and collectively as Africans, through a number of iterations of reports that were done by heritage specialists over years, they actually issued an interim protection order on the River Club site, which forbade the developer to actually break ground. What was interesting here was that immediately when Heritage Western Cape decided to exert its statutory authoritative right to do so, it was met with a legal contestation by none other than the city of Cape Town, the Western Cape government, the Department of Public Works, as well as the developer. So suddenly there were now 3 legal teams that are ready to go in. And part of the existing protocols in as far as how government works is that when one government department is sort of fighting legally with another government department, they usually put a tribunal together, or a ministerial tribunal. And that ministerial tribunal was in fact put together under Minister LaRue, and an independent tribunal under the chairpersonship of Ashraf Mohammed was instated. Now, the reason why it's important to mention this is that during this particular process, it is when the civics and incident-affected parties, residents, as well as a strong Southern African contingent of San and Khoi leadership went to the Heritage Tribunal hearings and asserted their presence and asserted an embodied oral historical record that would basically support Heritage Western Cape's claims that this was a very important historical site, but also to challenge what was a growing concern on how the site had not been adequately, the developer at the time had not adequately included the narratives or the aspirations of the San and Khoi. And so during that Heritage Tribunal process, Ashraf Mohammed was the then chair, basically issued very strong recommendations, if not warnings, basically to the city and the province in terms of doing due diligence in as far as really sorting out this abject sort of gross behavior at that point of zero kind of meaningful consultation with First Nation groups. And it's out of that the Western Cape Department of Public Works responded. They actually responded by deploying an independent consultant and they spent money and effort to get consultants in to become familiar with chiefs and various San and Khoi traditional houses and revivalist entities and political organizations, in order to put together a more comprehensive, inclusive representation of the meaning of this space to indigenous communities, in this country, and so it was through that particular process where I think the whole notion of public participation, meaningful public participation with with First Nations groupings came about. But it is also through that particular process where we saw the kind of divide and conquer mechanisms also being deployed, and this is a critique that was quite clear in the eventual findings of that committee, where they criticized the city and the province for engaging in activities that that were divide and conquer, that seemed to undermine the agency of stakeholders, in particular First Nation groups as well, that were in opposition to the development.
So when you look at it, you drive past the development. It's there. It's happening. What happened since these reports came out that they've resulted in the building still going ahead?
Well, apart from the participation in the Heritage Tribunal, the various civics and entities like the Two Rivers Urban Park Association and the civics surrounding the Two Rivers Urban Park, was about a 200 hectare space. were participating in the various commenting processes, participating in the drafts, of the HIAs and of the various, environmental reports and so on. Actively participated in the municipal planning tribunal process, where we talk about the rezoning. It was the MPT that was in charge of the rezoning, and there were massive objections from a variety of representative bodies from civics, environmental groups, First Nation groups, and so on and so forth. But what was clear, or what became clear, was that the report that came out on behalf of, which is supposed to talk to the First Nations, was a report that was funded by the developer, seemingly it was also done. Well, it was done by the same independent consultant who was working for the Western Cape government. Decides also to enter into contractual arrangement with the developer to write up the same thing, on the aspirations of the San and Khoi. And I think what was very concerning for us was what emerged out of that report. And I think this is where some of the more contentious aspects resulted, because out of that report emerged an entity called the First Nations Collective. Now, anyone who's not really familiar with San and Khoi issues would probably think, well, this is an amazing sounding body. It seems to be...
Sounds legit.
It sounds legit, First Nations Collective, But that entity did not exist prior to the development.
So it's there's an astroturfing aspect to it.
So basically, from where we were sitting, it was clear that there were a group of people that were approached who would be in favor of the development, and these acquiescing traditional leaders then entered eventually into a social compact with the developer. About 13 individuals who alleged to represent all the San and Khoi, and who have gone into a privately brokered arrangement with the developer on certain aspects of the footprint of this development, which would include a media center.
What was the deal? What was their... These are my words, not yours. What was their 30 pieces of silver?
Well, if one looks at the social compact, basically it means that there's a guarantee that and it's estimated or alleged to be a 20 million rand media center that is going to be built, and that this collective will have anchorage in this building, insofar as they'll be able to put events in that building, they'll be able to curate what's going on in there, and so there's an understanding that it's going to be a cultural media center, and there's been some consultation that's been going on with the developer around this, I believe, and it also entails an amphitheater, as well as a herbal garden of which would promote traditional indigenous plants, and sort of a pathway, a walkway, basically, for people to to enjoy the space. So that has been the brokered arrangement. But I mean, our concern is that there are a number of reasons why we would object to this kind of thinking, because if you're going to pummel the earth with 150,000 square meters of concrete bulk, and then once that's done, put a building on top of it, and then say, well, we're celebrating our heritage, it goes against the symbiotic relationship and understanding that indigenous people do have with the environment, with the land, which is a sentient being. We are of the land, and up until this moment, it is the land has been arrested and divorced from indigenous people since colonialism. And so it's quite interesting to hear people always shouting and screaming, saying that, well, why is the Khoi only now getting all uptight about this particular terrain? And I think that's because there's a narrow understanding, as far as the intergenerational disposition of people's sense of space and place, and also the fact that during colonial spatial planning, as you've mentioned, a lot has been done. That river has been redirected, or there's been canalized and so on and so forth. But that does not give permission for the river to be destroyed, and it also does not ever give permission to completely devastate that terrain and the sense of space that it has. And so the argument to kind of broker some kind of enclave within a concrete mass, and then say that this is culturally a celebration of who the San and how we are collectively as South Africans, is quite contradictory in my view. It's more like it's an epitaph, to a final solution of surrendering the very thing that, as traditional communities and Africans that we have, that describe ourselves as unique, is that there are things that are sacred in our lives. There are things that are sacred in our communities, and that these aspects cannot be for sale.
I want to talk about what the sacred and the enduring, the historical significance of the site, particularly the historical significance that it has on our people, on so-called colored people in the Western Cape, and identity. But before I do that, if you're watching, like, share, and subscribe, please. I think this is a very important discussion for awareness. So do that right now. Tauriq, so look, that particular site is very sacred in the law of the first peoples. The first contact with colonizers and the first land theft happened there. But can you outline for me exactly what happened and what makes that site so significant as to fight for its future?
It is an epicenter of liberation and resistance. In fact, President Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet approved the site in June 2020 as part of the National Liberation and Resistance route. And it's a place that we also consider a ground zero precinct, in the sense that wars of liberation have been fought here. The first Khoi Dutch War emanated from this terrain in 1659 as a result of the land theft that took place in 1657. And then before that, it is also part of a wider precinct where the Battle of Salt River had taken place. And that was a very important battle, which is inadequately memorialized. It's something that is a silenced history, and part of what has been a very violent epistemological onslaught in terms of our education system, in terms of our archives, in terms of what is public narratives, that the first liberation battle that was fought against colonial powers was on the 1st of March 1510 against Francisco de Almeida. He was the viceroy, answerable to the Portuguese king. This was the man who was responsible for the setting up of the colonial fabric in India. He also came with a severe reputation of massacre and genocidal sort of habits, to the point where, one would find in the archive and also in a number of, well-documented histories about this particular individual, the blood and intergenerational trauma that he left behind in India, in Calicut, also when he journeyed down the coast of Africa in Zanzibar and other places. And so, remember, there were ships, hundreds of ships coming around the Cape at that point. So,
from the days of Vasco da Gama.
Exactly, from the days of Vasco da Gama. So by the time he arrived in on the 1st of March 1510, the Khoi were familiar with, with the Portuguese. The first murder really happened, yes, with, around about when Vasco da Gama arrived, of an indigenous body at the hands of, of colonialist gunpowder. So there was a situation where someone who also wielded the largest fleet on earth at the time, belonging to the major slave trading entity, major commercial trading entity, stepped foot on this sacred terrain, and an extraordinary battle ensued.
The Battle of Salt River.
The Battle of Salt River.
Who were the two forces that
Okay, so there were the Peninsular Khoi groups. The Peninsular Khoi groups, as we know them, would be the Gorinaikwa. It was part of a Gorinaikwa kraal. This area is also shared, the footprint is also shared with the Korana, the Kai Korana, the Khorokhokwa, the Kochokwa. And before that, the Kamsan were also inhabitants of this place. And then the Gorinaikona, which is a group that derives from the main Peninsular Khoi and played an incredibly significant role in the interface between especially the Dutch when they in turn came around 1652 and soon started showing colonial intent. It's also demonstrative of the fact that between 1510 and 1652, international bound ships were anchoring here in the Cape of Good Hope, and so what is often completely underestimated and not spoken about is the incredible sense of tacit diplomacy that was being practiced by indigenous communities, and the indigenous communities that were working at the interface, receiving these ships, who had incredible mortality rates. Often more than half of these ships, by the time they arrived, were filled with dead bodies and people who needed assistance. And it is here that the incredible work of healing of the Khoi becomes prominent, in that there was a healthy trade in the supply of water, in the supply of vitamin C, but also in the supply of medicine, and
traditional medicine,
and so on. And it's also important to note that even within the archive, we learn about an interface of people that spoke a number of international languages. So we talk about the Gorinaikona and a particular group that had helped navigate this trading proto-port of what historians would call Kamisa, and Robben Island in particular. What's eradicated from the history is just this incredibly rich, cosmopolitan, international, global, creolized, descendant African community that was so vibrant and proficient in terms of holding this protoport and engaging in international trade and international affairs in the way that it did. Now, just moving back to the 1510 battle, D'Almeida comes, he sets foot, he goes up the Salt River, moves, what we believe to be the Oudemolder kraal, and is met with, his men actually go up there and they kidnap some women and children. And when they come down the embankments, are met with a standing Khoi army that have a symbiotic relationship with their cattle. And this resonates, in other cultures too, where animals could also feel the existential threat upon those that they had this, relationship with. And in this particular case, the cattle formed a phalanx and chased basically Dalmeida and his men, round the Trap, eventually to where the Salt River beach was, or the Woodstock beach, because that was all beach area, and were defeated there. So if it wasn't for that particular battle, it's likely we'd be speaking in Portuguese now. It is also likely that we had escaped the destiny and the yoke of being a Portuguese slave colony. Now, of course, there are other destinies and so on, and yokes that we encountered since then. But this is a very, very important marker in terms of our collective South African history. And where do you find this in primary school? Where do you find this in high school? But more specifically to the site itself, and I would say that this is the most important aspect for us, is that this is where land was stolen through the weaponizing of Roman Dutch law, when it implemented the idea of title deeds to legitimize indigenous land theft.
Right. It's like planting your flag in the thing and say, well, this belongs to Portugal or England or the Netherlands.
So
now.
in 1650...
But they codify it and saying that
totally.
You don't have a piece of paper, so, sorry.
In 1657, along the embankments here, in observatory on either side of the Liesbeek River, land was parceled out to the employees of the Dutch East India Company. And that is the first occupation. And it is from there that the occupation expanded and the colonial project grew on, alongside. So if we are going to talk about restorative justice in this country, if we're seriously going to want to talk about the issue of reparations, reconciliation, and especially dealing with the issue of intergenerational trauma and healing, we need to come to an embodied place that speaks to exactly that in its first instance. Because there were some very key things that happened in this parcel of land. The Freeburger farmers being granted their title deeds, and with that then the forced removal.
Yes, let's talk about the forced removal of the people who were originally there. How did this is obviously a function of Roman Dutch law being imposed on South Africans, well, the people, the First Nations who were here. So how did that take effect, and how was it enforced?
So the implications of the title deed basically sees the emergence of the notion of private property itself. It sees the commonage of parcels of land that then are measured, are walled and fenced off in a terrain that for a millennia was shared in circumvental ways with various indigenous groups, and now suddenly you've got this this parceling up of indigenous terrain, and with that meant basically the idea of trespassing, where indigenous communities now can no longer enter, access, or pass through terrain that they have been intergenerationally for thousands of years moving in and out of. And so what is also quite important in terms of this particular place is that Jan van Riebeck put up his infamous almond hedge. It was a palisaded fence to begin with, and then later on, converted through the use of almond trees into this thorny bushville, which stretches from where the river club is, all the way up to Constantia, where the Liesbeek River begins, on that side of Table Mountain. And that becomes the first frontier zone. That becomes a place that actually marks the disidentification, divorcing, disorientation, as well as the forced removal of indigenous bodies from the river, and also from these now farms that have got certain territorial demarcations. And the reason why the Khoi Dutch War then breaks out in 1659 is because of the expansion of these farms as well. And the territories now are just, becoming privatized left, right, and center, and there are wars that are, and battles that are being fought. But again, moving back to this parcel of land, which includes, the South African Observatory. And if we want to talk about the importance of a sense of space, the South African Observatory, which was formerly known as the Royal Observatory, is also an incredible place of Western breakthrough in Western science, in that, it is here where the world was actually scientifically proven to be round. It was with the invention of certain air conditioners to cool down the telescopes.
In observatory.
In observatory.
That's where they prove scientifically that the world is round.
That's where they proved scientifically where the world was round.
Wow.
Yeah. And at that time, when Jan van Riebeeck took over this parcel of land, this farm from Mustard, Mustard kind of couldn't handle it because of the, of what they called, a native problem. There were two very important things as well as the fence that were implemented here, right? One, Jan van Riebeeck then places a militarized barrack on around about where the observatory is. Secondly, import slaves from around the colonies to till the topsoil in observatory, simply because there's no cheap black labor to do it for them. And so while the local indigenous population was at war, slaves came from around the world, from Java, Madagascar, East and West Africa.
So in the middle of the resistance to Jan van Riebeeck and colonizers, they had to import slave labor from other parts of the world because they just simply couldn't, with effectively the people who were resisting colonialism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, the Khoi couldn't be enslaved. And also there were certain laws existing at the time that you couldn't make slaves of Khoi, but in as far as how they were later on brought into indentured kind of systems of labor and so on, we can rest that particular argument. But basically the slaves were brought in, and then these slaves in turn intermingled with the Dutch farmers over time, as well as the Khoi, who would embrace some of the runaway slaves because they had a common enemy, at that stage, with the Dutch. So from there again, there is an entanglement of people. There's an entanglement of the world that also contributes to this extraordinary tributary descendant community, that we are. But as a result, in particular, of the land theft that had taken place, and how that precipitated over between 180 years, 200 years of wars of liberation and resistance, which connected, all the way with the Amaxhosa wars in the east. There was a mass migration that took place, and historians have spoken about this domino effect of mass migration of Khoi and San communities being displaced as the colonial project basically expands. And so, the whole notion of return, the whole notion of ethnocide, linguistic loss, genocide. These are very deep and current notions that speak to our people. Because as much as we accept that there's a genocide happening right now that's unfolding, and there is a genocide that is unfolding in the Gaza, we must also fight as indigenous people for the recognition that genocide has taken place in this country. Because when we look at the relegated concrete jungles of the Cape Flats, and we live in a province, among other provinces, unique to the entire continent of Africa, where there are millions of Africans that do not speak their mother tongue, and there are millions of Africans that are unconvinced that we are African. And that's where we move to, the notion of how our Africanness, has the right of return, and that this place really embodies that. The term so-called colored is considered a very derogatory term, among San and Khoi communities, and I think it is a term that really depicts, an artificial construction deliberately implemented by colonial authorities to divest and to disconnect custodians of mineral resources, of very important aspects of the environment, including water and in particular land, from themselves.
Yes.
So it's one thing to kind of, talk about land theft and loss, but then, when we're removed from the language of the land and the culture, the indigenous knowledge systems that have been present for so long, then this falls into a very particular kind of colonial strategy of disidentification, and this is why our push for dignity and identity as Africans seems to be met with a bit of an allergic response.
There's a
by
phenomenon.
the current political.
Yes, I want to talk about that in depth with you, but to tie a ribbon around these First Nations collective people, I think the story that we told is worth much more than an amphitheater and a garden block in a somewhere within a block of concrete and first dibs on the space to do cultural things. I don't think that's in any way proportionate to the loss that would be suffered in terms of the heritage and the history of that place. But you mentioned, you talk about history of so-called colored people and all of the First Nations people that were there. And I find that this history tends to be weaponized, like in the hands of somebody who wants to make political hay out of this. They would say, you see, the colored people beat the Portuguese, so why can't colored people beat the DA or the ANC, whatever? There's kind of like a colored nationalism, which I think hijacks this heritage and it distorts and it almost it misaligns it in a way to create some kind of political leverage in this space that we have right now. What is the appropriate response to colored nationalism, which sort of bastardizes this history?
This is an exceptional question. It's a complex question, and I think we need to view this question from a decolonial lens, a lens where we have to look at the current messiness of the reality and understand that part of moving forward is also to accept this messiness and to understand that its imperfections are by design. And so once we look at it from that lens, then I think instead of looking only at the problem the problems of ethno-nationalism, racism, xenophobia that accompanies the expression of revivalist movements in some cases, you also have progressive entities that try and make a point of keeping a very strong sense of accountability and responsibility in terms of how this incredible collective historical narrative is to be used for the dignity of our people and the empowerment of our communities in a way that do not infringe on basic human rights and in a way that do not contradict the kind of politics that we have grown to appreciate. And I think to give an example, I've been, with this particular campaign, I've been subjected to a lot of smear campaigns. And one of the strategies was to kind of hammer at the thing that you're talking about. A lot of smears would be, well, this guy is North Korean, or he's coming from Malawi, he's coming from Zambia, he's coming from Zimbabwe, and therefore he's not Khoi. He's a foreigner. He's been educated at these universities wherever, and he's just kind of, an extension of a colonial enclave of a white observatory grouping that have taken their black-nominated Adonis and set him loose in order to preserve whiteness in all its a beautiful semblance of privilege, and so on and so forth. And I think, the fact that even that I would have a Muslim or an Arabic first name, from some quarters would be critiqued, be criticized. The fact that my mother is from Claremont and was subjected to forced removals. My father's from Simonstown. His family was subjected to forced removals. And this is kind of common knowledge. My mother would even come to, to our protest actions and so on and tell these guys, what are you guys talking about? Seemed to be completely irrelevant because they would just want to harp on this fact that, no, this guy's an other. And the reason why that strategy was chosen is because, as you say, there is a vulnerability within our communities that would take to that kind of argument in a way that would basically fuel a sense of alienation of legitimacy, of a sense of belonging, and so on and so forth. But this is exactly what the apartheid government and the colonial endeavor would do, to create these kinds of identity lines that would get communities up in arms around authenticity and who has the right to speak on behalf of X, Y, and Z. And it's only amplified in this case by the people who have gone into an agreement, with the developer. You don't see these kinds of voices emanating outside of that. So then one begins to kind of notice a particular pattern of how narratives are coordinated, and how vestige becomes the hand that coordinates these things. So I would say that it's a process. It's a process that requires a deepening of our listening to the history that belongs to us, and it's a problematic terrain, Roscoe, because many people look at the River Club and look at that place exactly as how you say it, in that. But this was a golf course. I didn't know about this history. This was this, and it was a landfill in the 1900s. But that's because the actual incredible history that underlines this place has not been articulated.
Yes.
And for particular reasons. For very particular reasons. Because it is a liberation and resistance space. But also in that when we are looking for a policy of healing, and we've identified a place where one of the first calls from the Gorenae Corner, for example, in the within the context of the municipal planning tribunals and participation, in the Heritage Tribunal with Western Cape, was for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the San and Khoi. A place where a process can actually happen, where we're seriously going to actually deal with the issue of language loss, the issue of dispossession, the issue of cultural epistemological violence, and these kinds of things, which is demand. And I think the intangible heritage of the site speaks to the vastness of the intangible weight and depth of who we are collectively as South Africans. The entanglement to the resilience, to the fact that we continue to survive genocide. And
because these weren't coloured people who resisted the Portuguese, because the term hadn't been invented. These were African people who resisted the Portuguese, and that's an important distinction to make when you are looking at through a decolonial lens, as you put it. And I think for so-called coloured people to recognize our Africanness would take the sting out of a lot of the ethno-nationalism, and it'd take the sting out of a lot of the tendencies of like xenophobia and othering and the competition within the capitalist system or the perception that the black people get all of this and the coloured people get nothing, and or whatever the rhetoric is. Yeah,
I mean you're hitting really on such a powerful point, Roscoe, in that our there is dignity in knowing who we are. There's dignity in understanding and appreciating and loving and re-embracing our African root. But we are faced with 200 years of indoctrination. We're also faced with the Verwoerdian paradigm. I have members in my family. We all have members in all our families where, and even in my experience growing up, there are assumptions and preferences, in terms of how people appreciate and react to one another. And in most families you got, and this is repeated all, time and over again, is that you got the family member with the curly hair, the family member with the straight hair, the family with the really lighting complexion, and so on, and the dark one. And we need to begin to invert our proximity to white supremacy into a deep loving connection of our African self, of our ancestral and our current African self, because we still remain unique individuals, unique human beings by doing that. And I think what has not helped is how, for example, terms like the term coloured have not been interrogated at a national level, where there has not been educational interventions, deliberate kinds of, a deep dialogue around this, understanding the epistemological violence that this term carries. Because, in most African cultures and communities, you speak the language of your clan, you speak the language of the community that you're with, and you identify that way. Coloured is a term that keeps a very important part of Africa's humanity in a state of perpetual purgatory, where it cannot identify with what it owns, and it also cannot identify with what belongs, what it may belong to. And so the combination of these two things basically create a yo-yo effect of having to swing to where power lies, because of the level of deep intrinsic disempowerment that it creates. And so where the power lies, it would posit for about 100 or so years, to the white master when slavery was happening and so on and so forth. And then in the early 1900s, the English did the favor of now actually creating the term colored that subsumed all these incredible, unique groups that had layered linguistic, social, cultural, political understanding of the world and themselves. And then that is re-weaponized during the Group Areas Act. It's weaponized in the Population Legislation Act, because now that we've packaged and de-Africanized and also placed this pole, this Jan van Riebeck fence, this almond fence between races. That almond fence between races is like the Liesbeek River today. Because even across the Liesbeek River, you would find and sense, what does apartheid feel like? And what does privilege feel like? You just go past Rochester Road, you have the sense of it. Because that is how totally vicious in many ways, also very deranged, apartheid spatial planning was very vicious, in that a single road or a single hedge would determine the level of existence intergenerationally between people. A simple stretch of road within a terrain. And so the term colored in many ways also it justifies that. It also makes it safe, because it absorbs that, because you're absorbing this trauma into a vessel that's struggling to identify things. But so, and what happens at a psychosocial level is the phenomena that we deal with. Right now, the most violent place in the world is Gaza. But when Gaza is not being subjected to the genocide, we in this country, within so-called colored high-density areas, have the highest murder statistics, GBV statistics in the world, the highest alcohol fetal syndrome in the world. And so this is where we also share a very deep, 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 deep sense of embodied empathy with the Palestinian people.
Do you think that that's why we, people in Cape Town in particular, or South Africans in general, people in Cape Town in particular, share this bond with the Palestinian cause, particularly given the recent events, that march of tens of thousands of people? What drives that phenomenon within our communities that crosses lines of religion?
I think there's so many things. We are of kin. As indigenous communities also, we understand what it means to be forcefully removed. Also, the difficulty of returning home. Many people have not returned back to Constantia, to Claremont or Simonstown. I might never have that opportunity intergenerationally, just because of the restrictions of how expensive these areas can be to purchase a house there. So it's just, although we're living in a system where we're in a so-called post-apartheid state, where one can move back to these areas, as in I can go to the ShopRite Checkers in Constantia to go and get a burger. I can go to certain parts of our formerly white areas. That freedom of movement should not be, I suppose, seen as a as a green card into this notion that we have solved the issue of apartheid spatial planning, that we've solved the issue of dispossession and forced removals. And when one takes a look at Soweto, Manenberg, Mitchell's Plain, Auschwitz, and the Gaza from an aerial view, what you see is colonial engineering. What you see is apartheid spatial engineering. Single exits and entrances, militarized barracks that man these entrances, and a kind of design that can be expertly deployed by a minority group in controlling quite efficiently numbers much larger than itself. And so we, in so many different ways, we relate to that. When I was in the occupied territories about 4 months ago, what was most shocking was how militarized it is in terms of, as you're driving, there's some person holding a rifle, literally with a hand on the trigger, aiming it at you. And you've got to go through looking at the barrel of a gun 3 to 4, 5 times a day.
Which area was this in?
This is across the West Bank. Across the West Bank, and just as you're moving out of Ramallah, and so on. So I think just from that single observation, when a person has to kind of get used to that, and it's usually a young male, white soldier. I mean, the IDF is quite diverse. They've got women, they've got people from all over the world, and different.
Even South Africans.
Different, yeah. They've got South Africans there as well, and there's been a number of calls to kind of get them repatriated back home, because their participation in a genocidal war really doesn't fall within the ambit of our constitution. I don't think that is anyway sort of allowable, but just the level of day-to-day attrition and humiliation that people have to go through, and the fact that we have poor working class communities, especially during COVID here in Cape Town, that went through the most humiliating kind of experiences at the hands of law enforcement. The Strandfontein situation, that gulag that was opened up, where the city of Cape Town's first port of call was to upscale a fascist a project that would basically catalyze the removal of street-based communities from the CBD areas into a singular space. And that space was so securitized that it would remind one of a checkpoint. It had law enforcement cars in their hundreds around it. Then there was a second layer of security of a private security company. And then you had a fence. And then you had these large tents that would sometimes occupy as much as 800 people. And for the first week and a half, there were no mattresses in some of those tents. So this is supposed to be a COVID response.
Yes. We had Carlos Mesquita here, I think on the episode 5, and he relayed like the shocking human rights abuses that were there. And the saddest thing about that story is that it wasn't an initiative of the Human Rights Commission, or there was some intervention, but like the fact that the Strandfontein Ratepayers Association raised an objection, then the certificate went, okay, actually let's break this thing down. That just is telling about where the power lies. But I want to come back to your episode in the occupied territories. And you are drawing parallels to the Cape Town, the South African experience with in the West Bank, in terms of there being really only one authority between the river and the sea. Who or what conflagration of entities constitute the authority that makes the experience, the daily lived experience of the poor and the working class so hellish here in South Africa in 2023?
So we are still, we living within a concentrated version of I think still the worst forms of oppression. I think this idea that apartheid has ended in South Africa perhaps needs to be accompanied with the difference between an apartheid state, which may have ended, to the state of apartheid, which is we are still in. And I completely appreciate that the apartheid state had ended. In 1994, there were massive sacrifices that were made by our ancestors, by civil society, by the international community. However, when you take a look at that Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened over there, that is stingingly coming to haunt us. Because what may have stopped as being an apartheid state, the efforts in curtailing and diminishing an ongoing state of apartheid has not been emphasized. It has not been a priority. And so what then is a state of apartheid? Well, who owns the means of production? Where does how is the economy run? And how are the politics of this country influenced by the owners of this economy, and the extent to which our foreign policy protects autonomy and agency, and whether or not the political bargain or political power during the CODESA arrangement was adequate in as far as the negotiated settlement of placing in almost in a time vacuum the level of accountability that should be focused towards the ending of very oppressive forms of what we experience on a day-to-day basis. We talk about Rainbow Nation, but how are we addressing very clear-cut issues of white supremacy? How are we addressing very clear-cut issues of the need for decoloniality? How are we addressing, especially as San and Khoi communities, and in the Western Cape and so-called colored communities, the behavior of ruling political parties that have spent very little effort and very little time in investing in the necessary question of redignifying parts of this country that still remain hostile to the idea of acceptance, that are still treated as hostile to the idea of acceptance. Now, there's a different. So and this is why our communities within this complex, tributary space of identities have a very unique position in our country, and should be given that voice and political energy and authority in order to actually, deal with some of these things. Because one of the issues, of course, is the leadership vacuum, and the the apartheid spatial planning. Just returning back to your question about the commonalities that we have with Palestinian people, it's around the consequences of this kind of engineering, but it's also around how communities have become so accustomed to understand that black bodies and indigenous bodies are just not responded to in the same way.
Of course. I mean, I read a Daily Maverick article earlier on. I think, I won't mention the journalist, but it said quite clearly that Palestinians have died, and in the same paragraph, so many Israelis were killed. And this kind of how we almost normalize the suffering of black and brown bodies, whereas white bodies suffering, the white pain is sort of given more of a pedestal, given more, I think, prominence. This is something that's like unconscious. I don't think the writer of that article is necessarily racist, but the way that it's like pickles. You can't rinse a pickle off and expect to not taste vinegar because it's in the jar for so long that you're just going to taste the vinegar no matter how you rinse off the pickles. So that's the real issue. How do we de-colonialize that kind of thinking?
Well, the having to resensitize people in understanding that there is an equal level of humanity that we're dealing with. Let me give you a good example. During apartheid, SADC was formed. You had entire countries basically committing to jeopardizing their kind of economies in order to maintain a boycott on South Africa, to the point where they realized, look, we're going to now start trading with each other. Botswana's going to deal with the beef. Zimbabwe iron ore and all these other kinds of things. We forget how civilians in Maputo were subjected to carpet bombing by the South African Defence Forces, looking for insurgents, looking for operatives. So because they felt that these were a threat to national security, right? That is an extraordinary and phenomenal price of human life that these frontline states suffered, but did so also within the notion that this was part of a broader commitment, an African commitment to seeing the liberation of this country. And it's almost as though, in terms of our memorials, in terms of, deaths, the nameless individual, the collateral that comes with it, the unfortunate aspect of somehow being in a building where they're looking for one, a senior leader of Hamas, and then deciding, well, we're going to, bomb the entire building, is a kind of thinking that it's actually beyond legitimizing in any particular way. So it's also it's incredible because how much is it worth if I steal your cell phone and it's me, and then I decide to now run the next street, but I'm in the next street, and you've cordoned off all the other streets. There's helicopters and SAPS is being like unreal, plus law enforcement and your private security companies. They've now they've cordoned off this thing, so I'm there. There's no underground tunnels. I'm there. So what? You call the defense force to come in and and dispense napalm style.
And I don't get my phone back because it blew it up.
But the problem is, yes, then
everybody else die for my phone.
you might not, you probably won't get your phone back, but how are you going to figure out whether you actually got me? Because apart from killing everybody else, there's a lot of
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the argument then the Zionists would say is like, well, they won't steal Roscoe's phone again. But again, it happens again and again and again and again in terms of like the cycle of violence that perpetuates. I think that there's been this.
I think we have to be careful when you use the term cycle of violence. Okay. Because when you talk about cycle of violence, you're talking about, and in this case, I think one has to also acknowledge the fact that, according to international law, Palestinians have every right to self-determination and can take up arms in order to ensure that, right?
And of course, the Balfour Declaration is illegitimate, actually. But besides that, that's,
Well, it was the role of, of the various iterations of Balfour that, have created this problem, that we're dealing with. So by the time, the Nakba happens in 1948, in 1917 already, and so on, there were versions of the declaration that we place, for the allocation of a particular homeland. But the reality is that 700,000-800,000 people, indigenous people, were forcibly removed, and since 1948, there's been a plethora of ongoing, persistent violations of international law. And so when we talk about a cycle of violence, we have to be careful to distinguish this idea of a cycle of violence to a liberation movement and the need to resist, because of course in our country we similarly, and this is now quite a well repeated example of how Nelson Mandela was branded a terrorist by the same entities that would then give him a Nobel Prize, and the same entities that would promote the image of Nelson Mandela as the exemplar of peace. So I think we have to, be very careful in terms of how we accept particular narratives, that, the response by the liberation and resistance movement is necessarily, within this thinking of a cycle of violence. I think that where you cannot depart in a way is that the killing of civilians, innocent children and women, these are violations of international law. These are crimes against humanity. These are war crimes, irrespective of who commits these. These are war crimes. The argument that you see now is that there's more data coming out that clearly suggests that a larger percentage of the 1,000 Israelis, 1,000 I think it's 1,200 who were targeted and killed were mostly security or militarized personnel, and that the rhetoric of babies being slaughtered and so on, the Biden administration had to withdraw that because it was confirmed as being disinformation, and also the fact that the Israeli government has now confessed that its own helicopters, in response to the raids, were shooting their students just outside of the border, and some have even asked whether this is part of a Hannibal sort of doctrine that, in some cases in war, it is.
Is that confirmed, the helicopter thing? Because Nantal, you sent me a TikTok today about that helicopter, and I thought, like, let's be cautious about this. Let's not platform it because I don't know. How was this confirmed?
Well, it was in the Israeli newspaper, first published there, that an internal Israeli investigation had confirmed that there was a sort of collateral death that had happened. I think the question here would be whether that was, we're assuming, or to assume that it would have been inadvertent, or whether it was deliberate. I know that there are some other claims that that suggest the deployment of a sort of a Hannibal doctrine. And the Hannibal doctrine basically is based on this idea, or the premise that a dead person would be less of an inconvenience, and I know I'm putting this very carelessly, than a person who's taken hostage.
Absolutely,
because the person that's taken hostage there's now leveraging components over here. There's all kinds of, it has vast political and fiscal implications, and so there's this old kind of a doctrine that speaks to you take the whole idea, like we take no prisoners kind of thing. Whether or not that is fact on the ground, I can't speak to that. I think as basically as time goes on, and we are beginning to assess the situation more clearly, it becomes more and more apparent that the level of disinformation that's going on, but also disinformation that's endorsed at very high political levels, is something that is totally shocking. And I think this is another aspect that as South Africans we can identify with, because apartheid at one point was actually considered a legitimate system, and it went on for a very long time. You had the Bantustans, you had parallel forms of governance, and it was something that even a number of Western countries, until the extraordinary a global reprisal of the anti-apartheid resistance, civil society movements that had sprung up around the world, it was actually seen as a system that worked.
As what is strategically important for the West. Are we going to... Okay, let's do some comments. So I can give you a water break, basically. You're just like speaking and speaking and speaking. The comments, Nigel Eden Williams, anti-hooligans. What about the bloody English? Gaan kyk hoe gaat het daarbij hulle? Okay, yeah, what about the soccer hooligans? Sibusisa Mtila was on the show last week. How does one really determine the value of any piece of land? That is the real question. Tauriq, can you give some input into that? Into Sibusisu's question about determining the value of the land?
Sure, it's a great question. So the argument that that this particular parcel of land is, I think, opens up very, very comprehensively this question that Sibusiso is talking about. Here you have a land that, has been described as a landfill. It was initially a landfill in the early 1900s. Then it was completely changed, manipulated, into a golf course, a small mashy golf course, which means that the terrain itself had been degraded to the point where some heritage experts will say, well, there's nothing here. Yes. And the city of Cape Town would love to describe, which they have in court, saying that this is an asphalt parking lot that is going to be redeveloped into a world-class centre, with world-class facilities that is going to be an absolutely exquisite benefit to the people of Cape Town. And of course, they have a darling client called Amazon and Amazon Web Services.
We'll get onto AWS shortly.
And I was saying, well, this is how we are going to appropriately use this land to the benefit of all South Africans. There's going to be affordable housing on this land.
Affordable housing.
Right now, there's just been an advert on the Riverlands of the apartment blocks and the studio apartments that are going to be there. And they're starting from 1.5 million to about 2.8. So the question is, affordable for who? Going back to Sibusisso's question. Affordable for who? Then you've got, this land now must be valuable because one of the world's strongest companies on earth, Amazon, has its African headquarters on top of this thing. Wow. The value is going to rise exponentially because you've got such an entity on this thing. And then you've got a hotel that's going to come. And then you might have, other kinds of, commercial footprint that's there. And don't forget that extraordinary media center with the...
Right, and of course the...
and the amphitheater.
And the garden, the herbal walk.
Yeah, because of course amphitheaters are really something that you'd find, throughout... when Jan van Riebeeck arrived,
he brought the amphitheater to appease the locals.
Well, he must have seen amphitheaters, whether he see them or not. I mean, that's beside the point. I think that how land is disposed of in this country,
and in this province in particular,
is a very interesting question, because the Municipal Planning Tribunal has the ability, like that, to change exponentially what is assumed because of certain, grades of and zoning designations to a parcel of land. What that land would be worth. So, if I buy a house, or if I want to buy a house in Constantia, how much is that land worth, as opposed to me buying a house in, Observatory, as opposed to me buying a house in Mitchell's Plain, as opposed to me buying a house in Manenberg, or in Soweto for that matter. What is the role of property value, and how do entities like central improvement districts, neighborhood watches, and these kinds of entities also are players within the navigation of lands worth. Now, I'm going to give you maybe my theory around perhaps maybe how we can additionally think about the value of land in relation to the concept of leisure. The concept of leisure. So I say this because when people talk about the River Club is a really complicated scenario. There's lots of court matters that have happened. It's very complex in terms of some of the arguments. Some people feel that they can't really keep up. How do you address what is a short way of looking at this thing? And I think the name, for example, of the company that's kind of, the broker between Amazon and that owns the site, there's a very interesting name. It's called, Liesbeek Leisure Property Trust. Now, this is, if you want just objectively begins to look at this name. So Liesbeek is also the name of the river. Mm-hmm. It's also the first natural environmental entity that was named by Jan van Riebeeck. And there's arguments back and forth where it's named after the reeds on the upper part of the Liesbeek River, or if it was named after himself. Leisure, we'll get to that. Property, well, this is where property emerges for the first time.
Right, enclosure in South Africa.
And trust, that's up to whoever is involved in this to make up their own sort of things. But I think the notion of trust, as in how trusts work in business, the fact that the First Nations Collective is now part of a First Nations trust, and so on. So I think in of itself, it really holds a very important, navigational tool about the history of the site. But let's get to this notion of land and leisure. So I think the point where leisure is guaranteed is and the level of that guarantee has a relationship with the value of the land. Now I'm going to take us a few steps back to try if CBCs can bear with me on this one. So here we have 1657, right? Freeburger farms are issued with these title deeds, okay? Legitimized land theft begins to happen. And then you have a very nervous sort of Freeburger with his family entering into an alien terrain in a foreign climate, definitely faced with an indigenous population that is completely unhappy about what they're doing, to the point where they are at war. So we can fully say that this is a very scared settler. Okay, it's a very scared sort of farmer that's entering into a terrain that is not theirs traditionally. It's not theirs in terms of familiarity with the terrain, and it's also not theirs because it wasn't given over fairly. They're at war, right? Now, for me, then how do you create a sense of comfort and leisure is through by the use of subduing the local population either by the sword and putting them to profitable labor by the whip, and in this case also importing other slaves to do so. But it's that level of subjugation to the point where you've got the stoep. I can come, I can sit on the stoep and watch black and indigenous bodies that completely outnumber me do everything that I'm saying, and there's no fear of reprisal, and there's no fear of retaliation. Whether that's a swimming pool, when soldiers in the 1970s were hopping over into Rwanda and bombing the living daylights, in Angola and in neighboring countries in Namibia, and then would come back to kind of have a dip in pools and places in the southern suburbs and their respective houses. These were the kind of enclaves that were being created. And so when that sense of total, not just comfort, but hubristic arrogance over time that comes with it. That is when the land and the property increases. Because you would find in most places, the higher the property, the more hubristic arrogance you're dealing with.
A castle on a hill.
Yeah. And because of that kind of thing, one can simply say, well, it's rich people, and rich people tend to be, XYZ against people who are not rich, and it's a very classist thing. But I'm very interested in the historical pathology of dispossession and the psychology of that over time, and why you have these pathologies of accepting that Roscoe, can you just go and get that for me? Thanks. And yeah, no problem. I'll get it for you. It is very like how intergenerationally are certain power dynamics so deeply instilled, and it was through that complete bludgeoning of the sense of resistance and the success, or the seeming success of what that may be, then results in within a decolonial context, this idea of leisure. And the idea of leisure is, how does a white colonial body exist within an African or a colonial environment, having possessed it, destroyed its custodian semblance, and then reassert itself as an indigenous body, and when that finds a particular sense of comfort, that is leisure.
And obviously, under no threat of disturbance to that paradigm. That's one of the things of leisure. But leisure, if you're not at ease in leisure, if that leisure can be broken at any stage, then it's not truly leisure. It's then just it's not a state of existence. It's a passing state.
Sure.
So, in that sense, it's like kind of like a entrenched.
So I mean, this is something that sort of I would think about, but also to be maybe a little bit more specific to Sibusiswa's question is intangible heritage. We underestimate the importance of intangible heritage, the right to dream, the right to listen to ancestral voices. The right to understand that we are part of a huge interconnected thread of humanity that is before, in the present, and that is moving ahead, and that we come from a very deep symbiotic relationship, with the environment, and that the things that we hold symbolically sacred in our lives don't necessarily have to conform to what is a built-in environment of worth. So if you can see it, and you can touch it, and you can scale it, then it's worth something. And I think the powerful contradiction here, and the powerful reality here, is that irrespective of whether this is a landfill or a golf course, the terrain that lies beneath and the events that happened on it, its genus loci, the ritual space, and how we can identify it as a place where dignity was taken away, and that dignity is being returned, and that we have a right for healing. And it's something that is important to all South Africans. It's important to our collective humanity on this planet. And this is why that the extraordinary history that traverses the site across the broader Trap, including Valkenburg Hospital, including, the green spaces that we've mentioned, where, Hartley Vale, Malta Park, and the fact that observatory is also this incredible catchment area of incredible history. And history that includes Ndabeni, which was the first black township in this country, where black workers were forcibly removed because of an outbreak of the bubonic plague. And that's how Ndabeni then became Pinelands, which was the first suburb in this country. It was where spatial town planning design is that's its birth child. To the world's first, as I said, in observatory, the observatory itself and those amazing sort of scientific breakthroughs. And you've got the first radio wave that happened in Arnold Street in observatory. This phenomena of having the first psychiatric hospital in in Africa, really, as the site of that amount of trauma, is also a place for the re-looking at how mental health services had responded to, to traditional phenomena, like a calling, calling sickness, and how do we interact with our various diverse ancestral communities here, and how their intellect and would intertwine with with other places and communities that were coming from from all over the world. And so value of land cannot happen without in our case, the peopling, the relationship of what has happened with people on that land. Also the relationship of what has happened to the environment on that land. We take a look at the degradation of the Renoster Fault. People want to talk about, the rivers are so, polluted. Our environment is so in peril right now. It was, the leopard toad was not close to extinction when the Khoikhoi and San were roaming the embankments.
I really hate the leopard toad.
Yeah.
Every time there's like some call for restitution, there's a certain group of people who bring up, what about the leopard toad? What about the leopard toad? I always feel like, like...
That the leopard toad's almost like, I think before the San and Khoi came onto... San and Khoi voices came onto the scene. One of the primary heritage informants of the Royal Club was concerned for the leopard toad.
And I mean, if there was, sorry to just break your flow, but if there ever was a mascot for people who were against breaking down spatial apartheid, it would be the leopard toad. It would be a white person coming out in a leopard toad costume and say like, build somewhere else. Put your soccer stadiums in the poor areas. That would be the mess. I just have this antipathy towards the leopard toad because of how it's used to, no, don't build there. But, but the leopard toad is conveniently missing when they want to build the Amazon. All of a sudden, that guy is gone.
That guy is gone. And I think you make a good point in as far as, for example, how the city will approve certain developments that are on a floodplain and then want to forcibly remove people who have no housing, who are encroaching into natural reserves. And that, sometimes how the environmental question is actually used as a weapon to completely, limit
Sorry for that aside. I just
certain
felt,
aspects.
I feel very strongly about the leopard
I hear you on leopard toad.
Yeah.
I must say that I'm a toady fan. I'm a toady fan. Leopard toads for me, I'll die for the toad.
I like the creature. I don't like its political orientation as it's,
Yeah. No, but
anyway.
I hear what you're saying. I think, it reminds us of the whole notion of, all animals are equal. Some are more equal than others. And I think that we always have to be very careful in as far as, how, the argument of the environment and the preservation of animals is set against addressing the human needs that are coming out of apartheid spatial planning. And there has to be, some level of, I think, genuine, give and take on that. However, we're dealing with a city where, we have to look after our open green spaces. We have to preserve what is left. Because the rest of Cape Town and these open green spaces are being snatched up, and the green lungs that we need are things that we absolutely have to fight to preserve for. The city of Cape Town and the provincial government, as you know, is one of the largest landowners. They own a significant amount of land and property. As Difona Kwazi has that's an exceptional project that they've done.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of not being able to support the problem of homelessness, the problem of people, who still have to wait, 10, 15 years before, are granted the luxury of actually being able to stay in a decent house with, electricity and a stove and so on and so forth. You begin to look at these other avenues, that there are other opportunities that exist and that have existed, in the past. I think coming back to the leopard toad, it was very, very sad when indigenous communities had to witness the can hunting of animals that were loved. Imagine you have a group of cats and these cats have been around for a very long time, to the point where your mother has stories about the cats, your grandmother has stories about the cats, and your great-great-grandparents have story about these cats. And then some entity comes along and realizes, no, these cats are actually quite special, to the point where I can hunt them and sell these cat skins in Europe and elsewhere for extraordinary prices. And in no time, these cats that you've built this intergenerational relationship with has vanished. There is tremendous unrecognized trauma in how animals like the quagga, the blue buck, and the Cape lion, which were sacred entities, were wiped out into oblivion. The word quagga is onomatopoeic. It's about quagga. So imagine these unique sounds on the Liesberg River, unique sounds where we are, which just vanished. Like, some of the scientists at the South African Observatory have noted the number of bird calls have reduced since the construction. And so, the impact that it has on animals, and I think our role to really call out any double standards on that, I think, is really, really important to make sure that we're quite clear on on pointing out, well, at this instance, this was what the decision was on this policy, but on this instance, this is not, the decision and why. And heritage, in the context of a community and a country that is reeling from the kind of ethnocide and epistemological violence that we know, means that there has to be concerted efforts, serious efforts to maintain, to preserve, and to restore these very necessary aspects of intangible heritage resources that we have. And the United Nations has clear guidelines around that. And I think that it's important to keep firm on this particular matter. Yeah.
Look, I'm gonna read the rest of the comments, and then there's a very important thing that I want to talk to you about, the AWS and the links to military intelligence. Muhammad, everyone, Carlos Felipe Mosquita, his ears must have been ringing because we mentioned him. Great guest, champions of those of us who suffered the indignity that was Strandfontein. We covered that. And again, episode 5 of this podcast, we had Carlos on. We spoke for, I think, 2 hours, 20 minutes about that particular ordeal. And Carlos is coming into studio next Tuesday again with a special guest.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, must tune into that. Roshan says, awesome. This is part of a history not told and a certain discourse push. This needs to get into the schools so that people can connect to this history and its roots. Obviously, when we were talking about the Battle of Salt River, Jonathan Mart says, when the colonial masters arrived, we were converted from our spiritual belief system to their religious belief system. Before they arrived in the Cape, our people followed a spiritual belief system. Can you comment on that? What was briefly, what was the spiritual belief of the people? Go back. Jonathan Mart.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you very much for bringing this up. I mean, it's obvious, it's a contentious issue, but an absolutely important issue when you're talking about spiritual restorative justice. Our families and our communities come from long traditions of faith-based communities, faith-based participation, whether it's in Christian churches or in the mosques, and so on, in the synagogue, etc. But what's really important, I think, is a discussion on the role of religion and the role of Christianity in particular. And this is not me attacking Christianity as some kind of sort of overwhelmingly exceptional entity, but I have to point it out by virtue of the fact that this was the religion of choice by the colonizers that was used to completely strip indigenous knowledge systems from indigenous communities, and then through the faith-based world, through that faith-based reality, the new faith reality that people were and are in, the abuse of misinterpretations of the Bible, the abuse of certain edicts where it was just almost understood that a person who was black or indigenous had to really kind of work to get closer to God, but there was something that was innately fractured, innately starved of a particular kind of spirituality, which meant that the spiritual inferiority complex becomes so emboldened, and it becomes very problematic when now it passes from mother to daughter, from father to son over time. And it is that kind of particular set of laws that we need to also look at, which punished communities for practicing indigenous rites and rituals. An example would be, and there's some really excellent indigenous academics who are doing some research in what I'm talking about, there's one very poignant example of how front teeth were removed in order to prevent indigenous communities here in the Western Cape from clicking.
Interesting.
So the clicks, and in Nguni languages you have three major clicks, right? So, and in Khoikhowab there's an extra click done, right? And so the clicks are such a fundamentally, profoundly important aspect of the landscape of the Khoikhoi and Nguni communities, as we understand, because remember, all the Nguni languages inherit these cliques from Khoikhowab. So anyone who says, no, but we're not African, or, Khoikhoi is not African, or Khoikhoi is not African, we colored, well, I think one way to kind of invite a deeper understanding around this, well, where do we get the cliques from? And the cliques are very, very important and very special because, vowels communicate the raw emotion. It also vowels communicate, birth, the open vowel sound, and life, and it also it connects with the tsunamis and the volcanoes in our world. Consonance, however, is the moment when there's a command of how that emotion is being shifted, shaped, and sculpted to bring about critical thinking and discourse. The consonant separates the full expression and it shapes it into the argument. It shapes it into the intelligence, and the way the cliques are working in traditional languages, and especially the repetitiveness of these cliques, scientifically as well. It generates activity in the brain, which also connects in various kinds of ways as well, which would include a spiritual connection and so on and so forth. So, one of the things that we ought to do is to bring back the click. We need to start clicking together. It's really beautiful because one thing that needs to be returned to the Western Cape and our communities is the click, and I think that would help us sort of click in to one another. And so this also gives us perspective on the whole notion of the love gap. Dr. June Bam, for example, and other academics have looked at this kind of phenomena where we accept that the love gap is an urban sort of culture that has germinated out of a certain time, and is quite still prevalent in our communities, and there's something about that generates almost like an African myth presence. It's sexualized. It's it is also completely, it's accepted within our set of circumstances, something that comes from our communities, from us, like this unique thing. But how are we actually addressing intergenerational mutilation? How are we addressing the core issue, the founding issue of the fact that, indigenous languages were barred? You would be punished severely for speaking these, historically. And, the Dutch East India Company had very imaginative ways of punishing people, as you know, extremely punitive, violent, medieval forms of punishment would be wielded against resistors, women who were found guilty of infanticide, for example, at the slave lodge. They were sentenced to long sentencing that included punishment after they were dead. So part of your sentencing for killing your daughter or killing your baby child, infanticide, that was considered one of the most dangerous crimes by the Dutch East India Company.
They would kill their children, so that they wouldn't be part of that slave.
Exactly, it was an act of resistance.
And then, what was the post-death punishment?
So, because obviously killing now, if the slaves cotton on, well, this is the logic. If they cottoned on to the fact that the means of production can actually stop in terms of the cog that rotates and the human power that makes what was the world's largest, most powerful company, commercial company on earth, the Dutch East India Company. That
the Amazon of their day.
It was the Amazon of the day. In fact, Amazon is. Yes, it's a very powerful analogy that you make in terms of Amazon and the Dutch East India Company. So when infanticide was then established, the kind of sentencing would include hanging, quartering of the body, sort of things where birds would pick the eyes out of the carcasses, to having these carcasses displayed on Sundays after church in certain areas, or having them dragged around town. Sort of real public displays of humiliation and degradation, especially for the families of the victim or the sentenced one, and then eventually, one of the last aspects of that would be, say, by drowning, where parts of the body that were remained or whatever remnants that were left, we would be put in a sack with bricks and then drowned. So this idea of making sure that intergenerationally you're sending a message, I think is kind of what the kind of, sort of intention was.
Yes.
And it's the same thing in terms of when Francisco de Almeida, he said very famous words in the Battle of Calicut, where he said, let the people know that Almeida was here, and let their children and their grandchildren know that Almeida was here. So, there's like an intergenerational sort of message that was being sent by Almeida at that time, in the Goa, when he was fomenting the colonial, future for the Portuguese in that area. And I think in the same way, you have these kinds of things here where you've got this phenomena of someone sitting at a farm surrounded by indentured laborers or slaves, knowing that he's entirely at leisure. So again, we'd be going back to that point.
So, I mean, I want to look. I'm gonna finish reading these comments, but I think in terms of the spiritual system, the spiritual beliefs of the First Nations who were here, I think somebody said that, of course, that the conquest of I think all First Nations people, one of the most important factors of that was like to supplant the faith of the indigenous people and to turn that faith into some kind of heretics, to hereticize those beliefs and to replace that with Christianity and other religions that would fill that void, to enforce a Western morality system.
No, totally. You know, the word savage, heathen, all these kinds of terms were attributed to anybody that was practicing life and spirituality in an indigenous way. And so, you know, this was already in that process of disidentification, that process of dehumanizing the practice in order to make people think that, okay, now this is a dehumanized practice, therefore I can't engage with it because then I'm now going to be dehumanized. And they were going to be dehumanized and also tortured and sentenced and punished. But then over time, it becomes systemic. Over time, it actually becomes, you know, a sort of a, you know, a belief, you know, where there are moments where, you know, our own, you know, we're trapped within this particular kind of paradigm of thinking. So it was an excellent intervention there from who gave the question? From Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. Gafieldin is the next guy, friend of the show. This commoner was treated very unfairly and sold it by his own, all for a few American dollars. I think that's referring to your experience with. I mean, let's hold fire on that. I'm going to protect you now by instructing you to hold fire on that one. Are there any more comments, Nigel?
Just check.
Okay, cool. Okay, right. So let's. I want to talk about whether we are in fact building a satellite IDF intelligence base in observatory, which is what Amazon. You could say one could make the inference that AWS is part of the military-industrial complex. What is AWS and how does it fold into the military-industrial complex of the US and Israel and other forces that,
So Amazon Web Services is the branch of Amazon that makes most of its profits. So most of its profits do not come from what we would think being the distribution, you know, online, where, you know, I would like...
American take a lot.
Yeah. No, most of its profits derive from Amazon Web Services at this stage. Interesting thing is that Amazon Web Services has its origins in Cape Town, in South Africa. We must think about that. It has its origins in Cape Town, in South Africa. Also, it has been around for a long time. The city of Cape Town and other entities have a well-established relationship with Amazon in terms of it running their back end, in terms of running their cloud technology, and that kind of thing. Amazon Web Services is an entity that has entered into 5 to 10 year contractual arrangements with various government agencies around the world, including MI5, MI6, the Pentagon, the CIA. And it also runs a very controversial project called Project Nimbus, which is a multi-billion-dollar initiative with the Israeli government. And this particular project has provoked an outcry from both Google and Amazon workers, tech workers who are extremely concerned about the role that Amazon Web Services has in terms of running aspects of the back end of the Israeli military. So, in terms of your biometrics, in terms of the cloud a technology that would hold very sensitive kinds of information, and the relaying of these kinds of forms of communications, within that kind of terrain, basically infers directly that this entity is engaged in genocidal activities, whether directly or inadvertently, and this has been the cry from these tech workers, and so we are in solidarity with with both the Google and the Amazon tech workers. Who
we have Project Nimbus. This is just from Wikipedia.
Yeah.
It's the Israeli Finance Ministry announced to April 2021 that the contract is to provide the government, the defense establishment, and others with an all-encompassing cloud solution. Effectively, a cloud that collects and manages the data that it gathers, the intel that it gathers, and disseminates it further to the agencies that it is in bed with effectively. So it's not a stretch to say that we effectively building a node.
If you carry on,
okay.
If you just scroll up a little bit on that, one of the terms which I think is important is Israel. The term set for the basically contractually forbid Amazon
and Google from halting services due to boycott pressure. That means that they, regardless of how much you protest, how much it's a clause that makes them pressure proof, government proof, in terms of sanctions of other governments.
So it basically will be a breach of contract for them to cancel this arrangement with Israel. Now on top of that, there's been billions of dollars that have been invested, in Israel by this this entity, and I think that the manner around which the technology further enables the surveillance of Palestinians and unlawful data collection, and how it really does facilitate the expansion of illegal, settlements on Palestinian land is an absolutely critical question. So, AWS, can be described almost as the Frankenstein of an entity where, its owner at one point was sitting in a garage and felt, how am I going to get this student book to the other side of the country to allow students to access set work and books, and it's kind of morphed from that into a whole range of other activities. Of course, including the obsession with outer space, and the South African Observatory is abutting the River Club, and one wonders why on earth this particular site, where Amazon was actually offered 5 other sites to put this development.
What do you know? What the other sites were?
There were about 5 other sites. Yes, it included the waterfront, and I think what's it? I'll send.
Okay.
I can send the list, but yeah, there were about 5 other sites, and this is something that we also discovered within the within the court papers, in terms of where might be alternatives.
But coming back to the AWS thing, and it being a node in the military intelligence machine, and why is this is a known? This surely must be a known thing, that a known factor among decision makers who are making the decision to welcome AWS into our landscape. So in effect, they can operate with impunity. But is your sense that people are aware of the pro US and Israeli military complex that they are effectively letting into the South African space?
No, absolutely not. And I think we have the right to know. I think all South Africans have the right to know. What is very disturbing is what they are doing in the occupied territories. And as indigenous people and as Africans and as human beings, also feel very disturbed in terms of what's happening on this site. This should be a World Heritage Site. It should allow the National Heritage Resources Agency to grade National Heritage Site. But what's happened is that the River Club ostensibly has become a Bermuda Triangle within the context of the broader Trup area, where it's argued that its heritage resources is it's neither here nor there, but except that there's heritage resources in the broader Trup, and have decided to kind of piecemeal the heritage component, and this is it also sets a very dangerous precedent for indigenous communities, traditional communities, and communities on the whole, in that the sacred precincts, entities that should be preserved, are under risk, are really at risk, in very serious ways, because a template is being deployed here. It's a template that we've seen before historically, but it's a template that's been deployed. And what's interesting is that Amazon Web Services deals in intelligence. So one would assume that they would have done their homework, and one can assume now that they are not ignorant of the issue, because before, for a couple of years, we actually didn't even know that Amazon was behind this project. In 2017, 2018, we didn't know. It was only at the Municipal Planning Tribunal, when the Municipal Planning Tribunal chair announced that they're going to rezone this thing because this is such a fantastic client. And I distinctly remember this, and the developer was being modest in not announcing the client, and he mentioned it, Amazon. And then in one of the reports, the big ones that were out for comment, there was a small little paragraph which mentioned Amazon. And then suddenly we realized, no, it has a major anchor tenant. And then it began to become much more clear to us what was the reason, the passion behind what was clearly, in our view, total violation of both environmental and heritage policy by the Western Cape government
it's not a pick and pay or what. It's not like a normal.
It wasn't a pick and pay.
It's something that there would be
and
some kind of. I think. let me rather not go where I was going to go.
Yeah. Well, I think what is important in understanding that is that then one began to understand that there's potentially a much bigger influence, an entity that we're dealing with, and that's when the reenactment of the Dutch East India Company now sets its eyes onto onto this terrain, and interestingly, the international media and local media would always and have since tried to contact Amazon for a direct comment. And one would have understood it then a couple of years ago. They're the anchor tenant. It's the local developer here that's calling all the shots. He owns the they own this thing, and they linked Lisbon Glacier Property Trust is linked to Zenprop, and you were like, okay, now this is a situation of the kind of relationship that we've come to understand the city of Cape Town has with developers, and almost expect. But and interestingly, when Amazon is contacted, they defer to the developer, and the developer then sometimes would defer for comment or whatever to the First Nations collective or representatives around that. So the questions around heritage, culture, history, and so forth are then deferred to this particular group that are ostensibly also justifying the anchorage of a company that is doing business, very serious business, with a country right now that is in total violation of international law, and that is perpetrating the worst forms of crimes against humanity, against indigenous people. And so that's why I think it's really important when you talk about, boycotts, when you talk about, why BDS is so important and these kinds of aspects. I think giant tech is hiding in broad daylight in this regard, and I think this is going to be, and this is a very important discussion to be had.
Yeah, imagine being one of the First Nations collective, and rooting for the modern Dutch East India Company. It's like, I can't understand that how being one of these people, looking into the mirror, knowing what you are doing and taking yourself seriously, or demanding that other people take you seriously as somebody, as a good faith actor in the space. I can't imagine. Look, Tauriq, there was a lot of things that we could have gone into. I think we were very restrained in terms of who we named, who we didn't, where we went into, but there's a lot that we can go into. I think we can. Are there other comments that we can? If there are, then we can close, because one more comment. Jonathan Mart, most of the Afrikaans words have their origins in the Khoi dialect. Tauriq, we had, I think 2 years ago, we had, who was it? Professor I'm trying. No, it was, we had Stephen Langtree a few months ago. But before then, two years ago, Randall, you had
Professor Quentin Williams.
Professor Quentin Williams. Yeah, also, I mean, and you spoke about language and heritage and culture. And I hope to have him back. But yeah, no, that's very, very insightful in terms of how you used language, or you supplant language and to strip away identity. You strip away identity, you effectively creating ciphers that you can do what you will with, politically, economically, etc. Creating, entire population of vassals, ideologically, even mentally, spiritually, in all aspects of the person, just being stripped away. And I think, that this is, it's important for a process of restitution to take place, not just land restitution, but like the restitution of the person, of the entirety of the person and the culture and the heritage. You have I think a difficult furrow to plow in that sense. But I'm with you. A lot of people are with you, and I hope we can make some progress on that. Are there any events or anything that we should know about? How do we follow? How do we contribute?
Yeah, if you go on to our campaign page, which is Save Our Sacred Lands, it's on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
I got a message from this person called Jules. He said, "Okay, please plug Save Our Sacred Lands, every platform, Insta, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok."
Absolutely. So we have an historic event that's coming up on Friday, where the Progressive Khoi and San groups, together with the Save Our Sacred Lands, will be conducting a cleansing ceremony at the Chap area, opposite the River Club. Basically, this is going to be a very important moment of solidarity between the San and Khoi and the people of the Gaza, the people of Palestine. As you know, as we've spoken at length, this is a terrain that speaks to our collective liberation and resistance. So we'll be declaring, that, and this will be part of our Heroes Acres, where we note and we through the kind of cultural activities and engagement with the space, we can commemorate and honor our fallen, and not in the way that you see in these parks where they got these statues and so forth, and they commission, millions of rand to make these bronze statues, and that's supposed to be kind of our history. I think there are other ways too that we commemorate, and this is also to in deep solidarity with the thousands of people that have fallen right now in the Gaza, that they are with us, they will be remembered, they are not nameless, that we share our humanity with one another, that we are of kin, that we share a deep history of oppression and also a deep history of resilience and a presence of resilience, and that we will overcome. And we'll be planting a ceremonial olive tree. And, we've invited these South African Jews for Palestine, which we, in our campaign, are amazing ally. And we'll be engaging the cleansing ceremony together with the planting of this tree, which would symbolize not just the resilience, but also our commitment to a just and lasting peace in the region. And I think it's also where we will begin to really express in meaningful ways, the deep connections that we have in our struggles, and so everyone is invited to that. It it will be a very important moment, for us all, and also it's our humble way of committing our solidarity and dedication to the ongoing siege at the moment, and that our demands are the same as the Palestinian community, and just to make them and in the world and to remind ourselves that until the Palestinians are free of apartheid, then we will also be free. And as I said before, while an apartheid state might have been something that we have overcome, we are still within the conditions of the state of apartheid. And what's happening in the occupied territory is basically a very violent, a concentrated, sort of almost like apartheid on speed type of type of situation, has to be utterly condemned, and that I think we have, as much as we all have a right, and to use the term birthright, we also have this inalienable right to defend and to spiritually hold, as best we can, our sisters and brothers and their plight in Palestine.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tauriq. I think we're going to have another discussion shortly. Shortly in the new year, definitely. I will try and be there on Friday.
Yep.
We might have Songezo Zibi of Rise Mzansi coming on Friday, and that may be preventing me from being there. And then next Tuesday,
it's also starts at 9 o'clock till noon.
At 9 o'clock,
Yeah.
9 o'clock till noon.
Yeah.
At the River Club.
Outside, it'll be just by the mound area where most of it's that public green open space that is there opposite the River Club, which is also opposite the Hartleyville area. That's where we will have the event. Just go on to any of the websites, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. You can. It's number 1 Observatory Road, opposite. Yeah.
Cool. So then Friday, join us from 9 a.m. Hopefully I'll be there. I really hope to be there. And then Tuesday on this channel, we've got former Springbok coach and current MPL, Peter de Villiers. He's going to come in. Send in your questions for Peter de Villiers. And Nantal, thank you so much for co-piloting today. Appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us at home. We really appreciate your support. Thank you to everybody who commented. Please share this. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and on Facebook. And we will see you next Monday for the pre-recorded show with Songezo. And then again on Tuesday with Peter de Villiers. Tauriq, thank you so much. And safe travels. Thank you for all the work you're doing.
No,
it was a pleasure talking to you.
So it was a pleasure to talk to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.